I'm John Byrne with AML Right Source. And with me today is a senior economist from the Economic Policy Institute, Adam Hersh. Adam and I were on a panel at Marquette University a couple of months ago for the commercial banking program. And I was very impressed with a lot of what Adam was talking about then, the chaos that's going on in trade with tariffs and all sorts of things. And I think it's really important that our community better understand the economic issues that occur when policy changes are impacted, especially because everything sort of relates to fraud and financial crime in some fashion. But even if it does not, better understanding what's going on both in the U.S. and internationally, because particularly important. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, John. Happy to be here.
So let me start with this. As we're recording this the week of June the 5th. And the reason I mentioned that is because things change on a daily, if not couple of times during the same day basis. So because of that, I want to ask you some broad questions about where we are, and then there are some specific themes I'd like to address in the time that we have. First of all, the issue of the tariffs. Now, just high level, let our audience know. Obviously, there's been tariffs for at least 100 years or so. You know much better than I. So sometimes tariffs is a good policy goal, sometimes it's not. When are tariffs, from your perspective, valuable? And then broadly speaking, what do you see with this administration's use of tariffs? They said they're having them because, as we know, they seem to change, if not weekly, daily. But for the bottom line is, talk about tariffs and talk about their impact in general, and then what you see now.
Yeah, so tariffs are very old. They go back really to the beginning of trading across continents. And as the early republic, the United States used tariffs as one of our main sources of revenue because we didn't have the capacity to collect an income tax. And this is where tariffs are used mostly today by countries, developing countries, because it's a lot easier to collect revenue from customs when you actually see things coming off a boat, off an airplane into your country than it can be to measure and collect income. But it's not has not been a significant source of revenue for advanced economy countries for quite a long time. One, because there's been just a growing recognition of what the economic impacts of broad-based tariffs are, and two, because there are much more efficient ways and more equitable ways for governments to raise revenues without having that kind of distortion on the economy. You know, this is in the United States really gone out of favor since the Great Depression and the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which everyone knows about from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, if they don't remember it from anything else. But under President Trump and this administration, right now, even with tariffs on pause, we have raised tariff rates higher than they were under those Smoot-Hawley tariffs, higher than they've been in almost a century of our history. And there are still credible uses for tariffs, but they have to be done in a very targeted, strategic way to be effective at supporting industrial development. And the tariffs on their own are not capable of providing that support for a growing manufacturing sector. You need all kinds of complementary policies to wrap around that for them to be successful.
This is an anecdote, but a friend of mine was in Ottawa in the past couple of weeks for a family-related event. But at the meeting, or at the party, were folks, actual members of parliament and people in the agencies, and they said in Canada, in a strange way, one of the best things that's happened with Trump's reaction to Canada, it's forced them to look not to the U.S. that they've as a reliable partner, which they've been obviously for quite a long period of time, but to say, we're going to do a lot of these things on our own. I'm not asking you to weigh in on foreign policy, but is um, what do you sense from countries that are now trying to figure out, well, not just with the tariffs, but the lack of support from an ally that we've been for so many? Clearly, these jurisdictions have to think twice about relationships with us, not just from an economic standpoint, but from a policy standpoint. And you must see evidence of that in the circles that you are involved in.
This is a large, costly collateral damage from the President Trump's tariff policy in this term, because there really are two ways of thinking about viewing how international trade works. One is there's a mutual benefit from cooperation, and this is how economics tends to think about it. It goes back to the specialization and division of labor and the benefits from that underpin really all economic thinking. So we can do things more efficiently, and we can consume a broader variety of goods when we cooperate like that. The other is more of a colonial or imperial mentality of dominance, and that is forcing others to succumb and pay tribute to the powerful center, extracting value and resources from other parts of the world. And here, I think, we could think of the North American triangle slavery trade, or North Atlantic triangle slavery trade, the Opium War that the British Empire waged on China in the mid 19th century. Those don't build trust. They build animosity and resentment. And for the 70 plus years since the end of World War II, the United States had been working to build a world based on trust and mutual benefit from trade and cooperation. But the president sees the world in a different way, and he's working to really undo those institutions.
The adjacent issue to tariffs and trade is fraud. And one of the things, and there was an article in the New York Times a week or so ago about trade crime. And there's always been trade crime. And in our world, the anti-money laundering space, trade-based money laundering has been a major issue for a number of years. And that's something with under or over invoicing and that sort of thing, just to move illicit funds. So that's been an issue for a while. But this article not just suggested, but had some specifics in there that because of either the tariffs that are already in place or what they anticipate, or the confusion about whether they're going to happen or not, shipping companies based in China are already reaching out to U.S. companies and saying, hey, work with us. We can find ways around these tariffs by going through other countries. Depends on how the tariffs are set up. Again, this space better than I, but the whole notion of customs fraud gets elevated. One of the, and this is one we're still waiting to see how this would manufacture itself, but there was a speaker at a recent AML conference saying that they're going to start to rely on the financial sector to have to identify customs fraud, which, again, trade-based money laundering is one thing, but have to figure out, are people trying, like they do with sanctions, trying to evade tariffs? I'm not sure your typical financial institution, even if they're multinational, are going to have the capacity to do that. But what are you hearing in general about, again, we've had trade fraud probably as long as we've had trade, right? We've had abilities to circumvent requirements and barriers and that sort of thing. But what are you hearing regarding this, based not just on the New York Times story, but in general? That it just seems logical to me that given all this going on, companies and individuals are going to say, all right, that's going to happen. We're going to figure out a way around it.
So I expect a number of your listeners may be familiar with something from economics called the Laffer curve, which was a big debate in the 1980s. Basically, that says that the higher a tax rate, the more incentive it is for people to evade or avoid paying that tax. So this is what the the tariffs that President Trump has been levying really raised. And I think there are, I guess, four ways that people can try to evade having to pay higher tariff rates. The first one is just outright smuggling, illicit trade, where you go around formal customs. And I know you had a podcast several weeks ago with people from jewelry, precious metals industry, and some of this discussion came up. That's it's costly to do that. It's very risky to do that. It's hard to do that at commercial scale for industries that need to rely on global supply chain. It's much easier if you're talking about gems and jewels rather than aircraft components. But it does happen. It happens particularly in pharmaceuticals or the precursor chemicals for pharmaceuticals as well. The second is something called trade misinvoicing. And as you alluded to, John, this happens when the importer just misdeclares the value of what is being imported, misrepresents it. Sometimes it could also be reporting a different commodity code for the good that's being imported, which may have a more favorable tariff treatment. And world has gotten a lot more complicated because now we have tariffs that apply based on the shares of different kinds of content components within a good. So, we have tariffs on steel and aluminum products, but those steel and aluminum products may often include non-steel and non-aluminum content, and so there are different tariff rates to those. It's up to the importer to declare, what share of the product is what, and how to account for that tariff. And then there's the issue of transfer pricing. Roughly half of all imports to the U.S. are between related party transactions, and not all the time are there external transactions available to be able to, anchor an expectation for what the price of those things should be. So there's room for manipulation there. So that's trade misinvoicing. Then there's something called transshipment, and that works where products produced in one country that have a high tariff incident will be shipped to a third country before being reshipped to the United States, where that third country has more favorable tax treatment. And this has been going on for a while in goods like steel and aluminum. And where the more commodified product is, the easier it is to disguise the true country of origin. And when those goods, which often are facing anti-dumping duties or countervailing duties, which is when a country provides an illegal subsidy to production. There's a lot of incentive to do that. There's some gray area with transshipment as well. So often products can be shipped to a third country and then undergo a minimal transformation that is some value-added process which changes the tariff commodity code. Technically, that's a legitimate practice, but it's one way that we can companies and countries can evade paying higher tariffs. So, for example, a steel pipe may be shipped from China to Mexico. Then it gets heat treated, or threads get put on it, and all of a sudden it becomes a different commodity code, and it can pay a lower tariff rate. And then if none of those things are working, then I think companies can try to buy their way out of the tariffs by getting exceptions. And with the tariffs we saw in 2018 under President Trump's first administration, recall that there were tariffs placed on steel and aluminum product imports, as well as on a range of Chinese technological goods. And when those tariff regimes went into place, they created a process whereby importers could apply for exemptions from those tariffs. And this process was not terribly well orchestrated. It was very opaque. And there's some research after the fact now that shows that companies that made political contributions to Trump organizations or to Republican Party organizations had a significantly higher probability of getting their application for exemption approved. And on the flip side, those that had Democratic affiliations or contributed to Democratic Party bodies had a much lower probability of getting their exceptions approved. In the second Trump administration, that process has not been put in place, but instead we have just some, based on reporting that we have behind the scenes petitioning of the president himself for exemptions from tariffs or other favorable treatment.
So you're suggesting there's not a solid plan this time. So I heard Tom Friedman this week just say that. She said there's no strategy here. I'm not asking you to comment on that, but I mean, obviously that's not simply problematic, but it goes against the rationale, if there is any, for the tariffs to begin with. And obviously you just laid out how complicated it is, because I'm generalizing, but not any one product is made in one country. It's typically, it's a complicated product. It's going to go, as you just described, through various hands in different jurisdictions with the different strengths that they have. You know, if you start affecting what Taiwan produces, it's going to affect a lot that's going on throughout the world, obviously, given the chips and things that come out of there, just as an example. I want to shift just a little bit to, what do economists in general think about the impact that all of these massive change in government over the past 4 or 5 months in the various agencies, whether they be agencies like the CFPB, the FBI, IRS, just in general. Are there metrics that discuss, besides the obvious, that if you cut a staff in half or cut it 2/3, obviously their work will not be as efficient as it was previously? But have there already been reports and arguments out there about the financial and economic impact that the U.S. faces from these various changes in government that's happening? I know a lot of stuff is still going through the courts, but obviously in general, like I talk to a lot of folks, and we have a lot of colleagues that work for IRS, especially the criminal division. And obviously they're focused on tax evasion, but just in general on financial crime. There's just going to be less people to do that. And they were struggling 4 or 5 years ago to ramp up because of all the fraud that's going on. So, long-winded way of asking, what are the metrics just in general of what happens when you make these massive cuts to agencies that have goals and missions that both bring revenue but also prosecute criminal activity?
Well, John, I think the honest answer is we don't really know, because we have never experienced this in an advanced democratic country like the United States before. The research on these areas tends to focus on developing country experience, where state capacity is much more fragile. State capacity just means that the government is operating at a sufficient scale and with a sufficient, quality technical expertise to be able to perform the critical tasks that it should be doing to support the private sector economic activity. But we can talk about, we can know about the direction of change, and when we cut so deeply into the government will not be there to provide those services, whether it's the IRS to be able to monitor crime, to collect the revenues the government needs to operate, whether it's NOAA to tell us when a hurricane is coming that might put lots of capital assets, let alone human lives, at risk, whether it's USDA inspectors to make sure that we're not eating tainted meat or E. coli in our salad mix. Those things are all going to suffer.
Yeah, one of my daughters worked for a subgroup of AmeriCorps, um, and just I know that a court just this week has stopped the cancellation of the staff there, but they could still be put on administrative leave. But that's an organization that you get these young kids out of college that work to work in conflict areas and in some places within the United States, and that gets lost. So that's an economic issue, but that's also a societal issue, right? And then you're right. There's no way to figure this out. And I've maintained, and I've talked to, I teach a class at George Mason, grad class, and I talk to the students about career pathing in the AML space. And in the past, I would say, well, you could, besides the private sector, you can consider, again, IRS, Homeland Security, FBI, OCC. I can't, in good conscience, tell them that's a career path for you right now, because I don't think it is. So I think that's another thing there's going to be economic impact, but obviously there's going to be very real impact going forward. Let me got a couple more for you. One,
let me just say there. I
yeah,
guess there
please
is
go ahead.
one area where we can really quantify the
Yeah, please go
impacts,
ahead.
and that is in the role of government-funded science research and development. And this is really irreplaceable because the research that is funded by the government is research that the private sector is not willing to take on its own. Sometimes it's basic research that is not readily commercializable. Sometimes it's frontier research where the risks are not known to justify private capital moving into that space. And the research we have indicates that the return on investment of public federal investments in scientific research is about 200%. 200%. So that's about 20 times the long-term average return on S&P 500. It cannot be replaced.
Yeah, the attacks on our universities, the canceling, as you said, of staff in these important agencies, and just the way that, sadly, how some law firms have caved. All of this is going to have impact, but I appreciate you mentioning that specifically. Give us a sense of what, and I'm going to ask you a broad ending question. But before I do, the Economic Policy Institute, your nonpartisan think tank, what are thematically some of the things that you folks cover? And I would just urge people to go to your website. The website is epi.org. There's obviously articles and blog posts and other things there. I know that I'm going to ask you about this. A joint letter from a number of economists on the budget bill was published through your website. But talk about the EPI and your goals and your mission.
Yeah, the Economic Policy Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank here in Washington, D.C. We've been in existence for almost 40 years now. I think next year, 2 years, we're shy of our 40th anniversary. We focus on how the economy can work for regular working people. And I think we kind of stand alone in this coterie of think tanks here in taking this approach. But we have a lot of analysis on labor markets and how the wages and jobs add up to producing what's happening at the macroeconomic level. So that's where most of the work focuses. My own work focuses on international trade, industrial policy, U.S.-China relations. So it's kind of where these 30,000 foot things interact with what's happening with regular people on the street. And the letter you mentioned, I'll just say we have brought together 6 Nobel Prize winning economists to talk about from all different political stripes, to talk about what the real economic risks are from this one big, beautiful bill, House budget reconciliation bill that has been passed and is now being worked on in the Senate. And this is one of the distributionally most lopsided bills that probably in the history of this country will give trillions of dollars of tax cut to those at the very top, while taking away social spending that's critical for not just those at the bottom, but really up and through middle class families. It's going to make the cost of living much higher. We're cutting, as I said earlier, the science funding, which is underpinning so much of our economic growth, dynamism, and competitiveness. It's going to undermine investments in education and healthcare, human capital, which also are main drivers of long-term economic growth. So there's a real risk, not just of being unfair and equitable, but that this policy, if enacted, will set us back economically for a generation to come.
We'll get you out of here on this. And Adam, I really appreciate your time today. Given your background, you're a PhD, you do a ton of research, you are a sounding board for policymakers, but there's a lot of Americans that don't spend enough time paying attention to what's happening on a regular basis, whether it's weekly or daily or what have you. And then some of that is because of I'll say, some of the bubbles that they're in. If you're talking to my graduate class and you want to give them some advice, hey, going forward, here's a few things you can do to stay current and accurate in terms of what's going on from a policy perspective, knowing that people have jobs and they're doing things on a day-to-day basis. What do you recommend that people do to stay current? What should they be reading, watching, just in general? Besides, again, not just places that agree with you all the time, but what are some things that you look at and go, oh, this is interesting, because they're given, I don't want to say both sides because I hate that, but they're giving perspectives, and I can make an informed decision based on what I have in front of me. Given your background, what would you recommend that would be?
Well, I try to get out of the Washington, D.C. bubble as much as I can. And I think the most important thing for people is to see and listen to other people in the community around them, and try to understand, what life is like for them, the struggles that they have to face. And that's how I really learned to think about how the economy works. I don't blame people for not paying attention to politics. For a lot of people, they don't feel like this is relevant to them. It's not serving them. It's not that they're low information or uninformed. There's a lot of things that they are invested in, but it's just not politics, because it's not meaningful for them. If you want to make it meaningful, don't listen to what the talking heads are saying. Listen to what the people around you are saying. Not just people like you, but when you're out there, everyone around you from all different levels. I think that's the way to really understand what's going on. The economy is not about numbers. It's not about the stock market. It's about people. It's about what people do, who they meet, and what they do when they meet them. So when you start thinking about in those ways, trying to understand how those interactions on people take place and what's shaping them, then you get a much deeper understanding of the economy.
Adam Hersh, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for what you're doing, what EPI is doing. And again, folks, EPI.org for content, podcasts, all sorts of other things. But thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.